You're on 94.9, it's 14 minutes past 4 and it's Tuesday afternoon, which means Creation Ministries International. And this afternoon, it's our second week in a row with Dr. Ron Neller from Creation Ministries. Good afternoon, Dr. Ron.
Good afternoon, Mick. How are you going?
Oh, awesome. It's great to have you back on again. We always love having you on, and we've got some pretty exciting stuff to talk about this week.
Excellent.
Yes. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about was in regards to some news that happened last week. I know in Science Daily there was a headline that grabbed my attention. It said humans reached Australia 60,000 years ago, new DNA study reveals. And I thought, oh, there we go. A DNA study has now revealed when humans got to Australia. I mean, we've talked about all sorts of other, methods of aging, which obviously they've thrown out the door for this one. And I sort of thought, DNA, how do you tell an age with DNA? And I thought, well, I better throw that one at you and just see, if there's a way of doing it.
Thank you, Mick. Yes, that was a interesting study done with, I think it was a German and English university, actually. Did some work on analysing human mitochondrial DNA and to see when when humans migrated to Australia. And that's based on that mitochondrial DNA accumulates changes over time. So they reckon if they can measure the number of changes that have occurred, compare them to other cultures in, say, Southeast Asia, such as New Guineans and Southeast Asia and Western Pacific, they can actually look at when the two populations separated. So they're looking at a genetic family tree and all that and so on. And so, basically they were trying to find out when did the indigenous population of Australia separate from the others and come to actually migrate to Australia. So that was an interesting paper that was written on that.
So how can they actually determine when the Indigenous Australians migrated to Australia using this, DNA? It's
a fairly modern technique that they're using. This molecular clock is sort of based on an idea that the mitochondrial DNA mutations build up steadily over a period of time. And by the way, these only get transferred from mother to child, by the way. Right. So it's an interesting feature. Yep. And so what they're doing is they're counting genetic differences between this one population and another. I guess the way that's easiest for people to understand that, because now we're getting into some heavy science here. Mm-hmm. The method is quite straightforward. What they need to work out is how many mutations separate people. So if you look at, say, Indonesians and Indigenous Australians, how many mutations that separate them? How many mutations have occurred that separate these two people? Yep. And then you need to work out how fast do these mutations occur? How often are they occurring in the human body? And from that they calculate time. I guess a simple way is for anyone listening, it's a very simple calculation. If we determine that 10 mutations might be what's the difference between, say, Indonesians and Indigenous Australians. If there's 10 mutations difference in their mitochondrial DNA, and one mutation occurs every 5,000 years, if one only occurs every 5,000 years, then all we do is multiply the two numbers. 10 mutations, one occurs every 5,000 years. That means 50,000 years is their simple argument. And so you end up getting a date by that technique, and you can say the group split 50,000 years ago or 60,000 years. You can work it out by that simple, what is the number of mutations and what is the mutation rate? How long does it take for one mutation to occur?
And they have a fairly accurate way of doing this because, of course, they were testing DNA 50,000 years ago and they could see exactly how many mutations there was then, couldn't they?
Yes. Yeah, but I guess the real, So they say. But there is a real problem with this technique, Meg, and it's how, look, how do you calculate how fast mutations occur?
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm being sarcastic. I'm sorry.
How do you calculate exactly how fast do mutations occur? Now, so what I'm trying to say is that the DNA itself, the DNA itself cannot give us a time. It doesn't give us a date. It doesn't do that at all. So what we have to do is sort of calibrate, if you like it, that DNA, in a sense, calibrate the clock by making certain assumptions. So we make assumptions on archaeological dates or fossil dates, or if you want to take an evolutionary point of view, you could say human and chimps when they split and so on. The problem there, as you would know, there are so many assumptions built into this. And the biggest challenge of all, of course, is the human-chimp split, which is often used. And they say, what is the mutation, or what is the DNA difference between chimps and humans? And once you work out what the DNA difference is, they then say, well, chimps became humans so many millions of years ago. And so what they do then is that they say, okay, well, if we measure the difference in DNA in between the two, which we've done, and divide the difference over the time period, which they estimated millions of years, that gives us a rate of X mutations over Y years. But here's the problem, Nick. It's a very, very big problem. That makes it assumption dependent.
Yep.
It's an assumption dependent technique. You make certain assumptions, and then on those assumptions you try and calculate the date. But you better be right that those assumptions are correct.
I totally don't get the whole idea that if they're thinking about chimps turning into people, that there must be like a billion different mutations in the DNA, and we've already proven that mutations are always backward, that they don't actually make things better. It's a loss of information. So what are they saying? Are they saying that we're actually a way worse version of a chimp? Yeah,
interesting comment, Nick. They'll actually use other techniques as well. So, for example, it doesn't have to be a chimp. You could say, look at let's say a fossil human, say a Neanderthal. They'll refer to certain people as Neanderthal. You could look at the DNA in a Neanderthal, comparing it to a modern human as well.
Yep.
But again, you've got to make an assumption. Well, when did Neanderthals live?
Mm-hmm.
How many years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, were they around? So you have to make this assumption that that's when Neanderthals were. Or you could look at anything else, a geologic record, and say, well, when was that rock around? All these sorts of things. So I guess what I'm saying here is the technique is not a reliable technique, because you've got to make an assumption of when do you start, when did it start, the mutations, to where it is today. Is it millions of years ago? Is it hundreds of thousands of years ago? Or from a biblical point of view, was it only 6,000 years ago?
Yeah.
And so the technique giving an age isn't based on the wonderful measurement of the mutations, which I think is extremely good when we can do it today. But you're making an assumption when all of that started. How long ago did all that start? So
the human DNA, it's been completely mapped now, hasn't it?
Basically, yeah.
How long ago did that happen?
We've got a lot of work to do, but still.
How long ago did that happen?
Good question. It's only, certainly with the mitochondrial DNA and so on, that's only about in the 1960s, might have been late 50s, that all this has began to happen.
So they've been able to look at it for the last 70 years or so, and how can they possibly come up with how would they possibly know how many times our DNA falls apart between then and now? How many times there's been a break?
Great question. And I think this hits a reliability issue. I guess there is one huge problem here, Nick, is that we can measure mutation rates today, because if we take your father, yourself, and if you've got children, we can look at the mutation rate, because it does occur generation to generation.
Yep.
The big problem is, huge problem, is that when we look at modern people, the mutation rate is much, much faster. I mean, incredibly faster today than they're saying if you look at it from a long-term evolutionary point of view.
Yep.
In other words, the rates we're measuring today for ourselves, between your grandfather, your father, yourself, and your children, these are empirical data. They're accurate, measurable data.
Yep.
But, you know, that's great. But I guess, is it, let me ask, put it two ways. Is it that the modern rates that we measure correct, where we get a very high value of mutation, and therefore humans have been on this planet for far less time? Or do we go down a line of thinking going, was the past long-term rates that were not measured directly, they were simply inferred, were they measured correctly? Well, we don't know that.
Mm.
And that suggests we've been on the planet for a long time, much longer than the Bible said. Which one are we going to accept? The actual empirical data we have in our hands that says we've only been here for thousands of years? Or are we going to accept this evolutionary thinking and calculate the rates that way? And I guess there lies the problem, doesn't it? If you start with evolutionary assumptions to get a date, then you're going to get evolutionary conclusions. And that's circular argument. That's circularity.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, sadly, this is a publication that's like, you know, this story's about a week old. Here they are using, I guess, made up information. They're just creating, but they're creating a new way of aging that fits their old pattern. But again, there's no real science in there. It's just not accurate.
Yeah, I agree with you very much on that. The accuracy we have is only in the modern mutation rate between father and son, or mother and daughter, and all that sort of thing. That's the only accurate data. And that data does not match anywhere near what they say the past had. Mm. So in the past, the mutation rates were quite slow, but today's measurements indicate they're quite high. Mm. So which one's correct? What we measure or what we believe, what we need to assume? Because why? We live in a world of thinking that evolution is true, so therefore we have to match that data, not actually measure it. It's a way of thinking that I struggle with as a scientist.
Yep. Yep, I think many people do. Look, we're going to go into a little break right now. And when we come back, we might look a little bit more at this and even talk about a term that I've heard, Mitochondrial Eve, and ask you a bit about that one as well. You are on 94.9. It's 27 minutes past 4. We're with Dr. Ron Neller, who will be back with us after this song. You're on 94.9. It is 23 minutes to 5, and we have Dr. Ron Neller on the line from Creation Ministries International. And we've been talking about a news story that came through in the last week or so. The headline was Humans Reached Australia 60,000 years ago, a new DNA study revealed. Further their summary says scientists have uncovered compelling evidence that humans reached New Guinea and Australia around 60,000 years ago. And so, of course, my question to Dr. Ron was, you know, how compelling really is this evidence, and how do they tell ages? By looking at DNA. Now, Dr. Ron, we've talked to, different people from Creation Ministries in the past about carbon dating and radiometric dating, and we've talked about all the issues that they have, looking at half-lives and how things could be just so totally wrong with some of those aging techniques. And here we have a science news story in the last week saying, hey, we've got this new compelling evidence that it will give you an age. And they're using DNA, basically, you know, talking about how quickly DNA breaks down. And it to me, it sounds a little bit nuts, particularly after what you've just been telling us. The DNA breakdown, has it been breaking down at the same rate all the time? They are really assuming something here that just sounds a little bit nuts.
Yes, there's quite a host of assumptions actually, and the one we talked about was the rate of mutations, and they like to keep it fairly constant, and they also base it on evolutionary assumptions. So when they make comparisons with the past and here, they assume the dates of the past were hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and so therefore the technique is distorted. The measurement technique of using the DNA is distorted because it's based on that.
Yep.
So it's not based on empirical evidence. It's based on assumptions that are being made about the past and so on. But I'll add a few more comments on that. That's not the only problem that's with this technique, and it's similar to radiometric dating. It'll be riddled with problems. I mean, for example, parental age, especially the father's age, has an impact on the mutation rate. Uh-huh. Now, the older the father, of course, the more mutations. Mm. And so that's rather interesting when we look at biblical history and we look at Adam and his children, and they're living up to 1,000 years, basically. So the mutation rate would have been, pretty fast, actually.
Wow.
Because of that. But you've also got environmental conditions, differences. They cause problems. We know that. We've measured it. Yep. If you look at DNA repair efficiency, and I won't go into all these details, they cause distortions to the data, or you have to take these into account. There's also, if a population has a bottleneck, in other words, limited to a very small number, that causes real chaos as well. It distorts the clock, so to speak, to use their terminology. And of course, we did have one big bottleneck, didn't we? And that was the global flood. When that bottleneck came down to 8 people. Then you also have migrations have an effect, isolation, interbreeding. All of these have an effect on these techniques. Yes. And look, there's a lot on that. And so I'll just plug CMI for a moment. We have got some incredible articles on mitochondrial DNA written by top scientists worldwide. One by Bergman. He's got 2 PhDs amongst his 9 other degrees, 7 other degrees, 9 degrees, biology, chemistry. Then Tompkins has a PhD in genetics. All of them are saying that the mitochondrial DNA is an exceptionally weak technique. So I'm supporting what you're saying there, Mick. It is such a, look, it's almost like clinging to a technique to convince people that evolution's true, when it's actually based on evolutionary assumptions, and therefore you can only get an evolutionary conclusion, and therefore it's a complete circular argument.
Okay, now I've got a question now that's going to be real left field, and it mightn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. But quite often you see ads where they say, take more fish oil or, omega-3 fatty acids. Is that to try and stop DNA from breaking down?
Well, now you're testing me beyond my science capacity in that. As you know, I'm an earth scientist. Yep. I like playing hard. Not in the human body. Whilst I read a fair bit on the mitochondrial DNA and other factors like that, I actually couldn't answer that question. So I guess, again, a good technique, a fancy technique that people should adopt, is just go onto creation.com and type those keywords in.
Yep.
I certainly know that your medical, let's say health, your health, is affected by what you take. And I like to take good quality vitamins, a whole bunch of them. But that actually stood the test of time for me, because I actually was diagnosed with a brain tumor at one stage. And when I went in there, they said, whoa, we thought we'd have to wait longer to get you healthy. You are one of the healthiest characters who's ever come in with a brain tumor. And that was because I was taking omega, magnesium, all these sorts of things. And they said, well, we don't have to wait to get you ready for operation. We can put you straight in. Wow. So I do know that it does help you. Now, whether that has an impact on your DNA, I don't know. My suspicion is not, but then I'm not a geneticist.
Yep.
Because what we're really talking about here is mutations. And mutations are essentially negative. They're negative.
Yep.
So,
I would breaking down. Yeah.
I would say if you you've got to look at your health as well and just say, well, do you need the vitamins? And if you do, you need to be careful of which ones as well.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know,
Certainly.
that-
Now,
yeah.
we haven't really covered this mitochondrial Eve and what it refers to.
Oh, yes. Now, that was an interesting, as part of all this research, they were a bit shocked because, as I said, the mutation rate today is exceptionally high.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also trace the mutations back through lineage and trace it back through generations. And so when you trace them back, and therefore you have less mutations within the body, it can be all calculated out.
Yep.
They came up to a conclusion that there was actually one female, and they called it Mitochondrial Eve. Now, that rings a bell, doesn't it?
Yep.
That there was Eve was a single, the original woman. Now, what's fascinating is that many scientists cannot accept that. And so what they now argue is that Mitochondrial Eve, this does not mean that she was the only woman alive.
Uh-huh.
You've got to follow the argument with a sense of humour here. It doesn't mean she's not the only woman that was alive then. It means that she is simply the most recent woman from whom all other living humans inherited their DNA today. In other words, other women existed, but their maternal lines eventually died out.
Right.
In other words, they cannot accept starting from one. They're just saying we are descendant from one.
Yep.
But there mustn't have been one. That can't be true. There had to be more. Now, you've got to follow that argument.
Yes.
So if all the evidence points to one, but you say there must have been others that existed without any evidence at all,
Yep.
you've got to ask, how are you thinking? Is that scientific thinking?
Yeah.
Or is that sort of science fiction thinking?
Yeah, well, obviously the science points to one, but the theory from their point of view says there must have been more.
That's right. And they also get the date wrong. Because they use the evolutionary argument, and therefore the mutation rates were quite slow,
Yep.
they can push her age back to hundreds of thousands of years. I think it's about, it's 300,000 years ago is when they say she must have existed. But this is the fascinating point. If you take today's mutation rate, which is quite high, and you run that back through time, guess what? Mitochondrial Eve would exist about 6,000 years ago.
Wow.
So there you are. We have absolute data in our hands of the mutation rate today being high, all pointing back to one female roughly 6,000 years ago. But science can't accept that because that's a biblical response, not an evolutionary response.
Wow, but the science pretty much shows that the biblical dates are correct.
That's what I'm saying, yes. So it's an incredible argument they put forward on no evidence at all, when the evidence we do have points to a biblical outcome. And As I said to you last week, it was the research I did over 35 years as a scientist who had not accepted Christ, how the research does point, no matter whether you're looking at mitochondrial DNA or whether you're looking at landscapes and floods and all these sort of things, there's an incredible pointing of science back to the Bible, the book of Genesis, as being correct and historical and foundational. And I think that helped me come to Christ. But there's an incredible resistance to modern data that points to the Bible.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. I think this week was quite amazing coming to that conclusion and particularly understanding how the mitochondrial DNA breaks down and the rate it's breaking down. I can certainly see it pointing, to a biblical conclusion. And, of course, you were saying, people, if they have more questions, can go to creation.com.
Exactly. And names I've given there, Bergman, Bergman, or Tompkins, Tomkin. Another one is Carter, Robert Carter. So we've got top scientists all around the world. These are all overseas top scientists, professors in universities, absolutely criticising mitochondrial DNA and just highlighting the weakness and the mistakes and the assumptions built into it. when you look at it from a long-term evolutionary view.
Yep.
And equally, if you look at it as modern science and look at it in the measured science over the past few generations, boy, does it point towards the Bible.
Absolutely.
And those articles are there's a bulk of them there, put it that way. So I encourage people to, I'm sure, we haven't been able to go to the depth of it, but there's much more to learn from those articles.
All righty. Well, Dr. Ron Neller, thank you so much. What an awesome week. And we'll look forward to the next time we're chatting with you. We've just had you for 2 weeks in a row. I think you'll be back in, let me see. I can't see on the dates just at the moment. I can see we've got you in October and it maybe not before October. So I'm looking forward to that already.
Likewise, Mick.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Much appreciated.
That was Dr. Ron Neller from Creation Ministries International. If you have any more questions in regards to mitochondrial DNA, just head to creation.com. You're on 94.9